Hello and happy Friday. No, it's not Friday. It's Thursday. Getting my times all mixed up, but because I usually go live on Fridays, it's so in my system. So happy Thursday. And thank you for adjusting to this time. I've just had to do a little bit of rearranging because of some upcoming travels. But I'm super excited for this topic. I thought it would be a good continuation from what we did or what I did in the last solo episode. So last time it was about carbs and why simple carbs, complex carbs, why there's a place and time for both of these and when. And today I'd like to talk about the different types of fats and why that actually matters. So first of all, I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction in regards to the different categories of fats, because a lot of times we're not even aware of the different categories and why there is a certain benefit to almost each one of them, and which ones to avoid exactly because of that, and which ones we should eat even more of, and yeah, how that can actually benefit you in the long run, fighting inflammation, fighting chronic disease, improving your recovery, etc., etc. So let's get started with just fats overall. A lot of these things you might already know. Fats are our body's secondary energy source, meaning, or last time I spoke about carbs being our body's preferred primary energy source for quick, immediate energy, simply because of the chemical way of processing it. So fats take longer to be transcribed into usable energy for the body, and because of that, for like quick or immediate things, we want, or our body wants to utilize carbs, whereas for longer duration exercise, our body resorts to fats. So even things like, standing, postural things, etc., most of that energy is going to come from your fat resources, from the slower process, because there's no or the body can anticipate that you are going to need that more or less. So fats are an essential macronutrient, which means your body cannot get by without any fats, which is why sometimes super low fat diets are dangerous, or at least are very detrimental for our hormones if we follow them long term. I'm going to get more into that and where we should draw the line, where we should say, okay, this is the absolute minimum that I should at least cross all the time in order to stay healthy. I'm going to get into that a little bit later on. Why are fats helpful otherwise? Well, many fatty foods taste delicious for one, but also because they can help with satiation in the sense of slowing down digestion. Generally speaking, like fats on their own without protein and carbs are not actually that satiating. Simply, if you think of food volume in the stomach, once again, I've spoken about that last time in regards to fiber and so on. But if you think of a tablespoon of oil, has about 140, 135 calories. And that doesn't take up very much space in your stomach. If you eat 135 calories from vegetables, you're probably going to have a plate like that, right? So fats on their own are not actually that satiating in the instance, but especially if they are paired with vegetables with protein, because they are slower digested, or are harder to break down, take longer to break down rather, they slow down the rate of digestion of the other foods. So if you are, after a particular meal, specifically hungry, let's say like an hour later or so, it might be worth adding a little bit more fats to that meal so that you're feeling satiated for longer, because the digestive process will take a little bit longer. And then lastly, just some basic information. A gram of fat has 9 calories overall. Sorry, that's a typo. It should say 9 calories per 1 gram of fat. So my apologies. So this is different to carbs and protein, which have 4 calories per 1 gram, or alcohol, 7 calories per 1 gram. And the different categories that we're about to get into, the 4 different categories, are according to the fat's chemical structure. I would like to start off with the quote-unquote worst one, which is the trans fats or trans fatty acids, mostly occurring in, I called it artificial foods, but more like processed foods, and only in very small quantities occurring naturally, which makes it rather easy for us to keep in mind or to stay away from in terms of the classification. So what do I mean by artificial foods? It would be mostly the hydrogenated oils in packaged, deep fried, or frozen food. So like if you're purchasing cookie dough in the chill section, if you're purchasing frozen pizza, or let's say like conventional, because there is obviously healthier stuff on all of those things available also, but like your standard super cheap frozen pizza, your cookies even in the regular section, quite often like the cheap ones, or if you're going to a state fair and you're purchasing a funnel cake or whatever, the oil that it has been cooked in is often also from trans fatty acids. Why are a lot of food manufacturers using trans fatty acids? Because they last forever and because they are incredibly cheap to manufacture. So basically, again, they are just like created by chemical processes, and because of that, they are so cheap instead of being something that is naturally sourced. However, trans fatty acids are also present in very, very small quantities that we don't need to necessarily worry about that much in some other foods, such as like ham or pork or beef, etc. But again, in those products or foods, it's not necessarily the main contributor to the evil. It's really more if we're having packaged food on a regular basis, because these trans fatty acids very, very, very clearly do raise LDL cholesterol and lower HDL cholesterol, which I'll get a little bit more into cholesterol in a minute. However, like you're probably aware of some of the debates around cholesterol, and our body needs cholesterol. I will mention that once more in a point later on. But so in order to produce hormones, etc. But also nonetheless, even though we do need cholesterol, we mostly want to either at least have a good balance between HDL and LDL, or even better, having lots of HDL and very little LDL cholesterol in order to keep our arteries nice and clear and our blood running smoothly. And the trans fatty acids most certainly do not contribute to that in a positive way. On the contrary, they are very harmful. So these are, in fact, to be limited. Despite all the fats are good for you, fats are good for you, trans fatty acids are not good for you. There is no debate around that, even if you are coming from a keto camp, even if you are, someone who is pro-fat. That is, a different topic, but trans fatty acids are in no way, shape, or form something that we want to necessarily eat more of. If you have a cookie here and there or some frozen pizza, once a month, you're not going to die from that immediately. That's not what I'm saying, but they are to be limited. The next is another very controversial topic, which is saturated fats. Why am I saying this? Well, because saturated fats used to be demonized. Saturated fats, especially in, I think it was in the 60s, there was a big study by, his name is Angel Key. It was a 7-country study was the name of it. And it basically, we have to say that it was government funded, which, they can kind of determine the outcome, but that, again, is not the topic here. However, what they basically drew up was a correlation between saturated fats and heart disease. And because of that, or after that, all these government recommendations came out of saying like no more butter, here's spread, no more meats, or all low-fat dairy, etc., etc. So this is how saturated fats got demonized in the first place, all again funded by companies like margarine companies and all the rest of it. But in the last, let's just say 10, 20 years, it has kind of swapped completely the other way, where people are saying that's complete bullshit. All the saturated fats, let's put coconut oil on everything, let's have regular butter with everything, and so on. And while there certainly are benefits to those products, particularly if it's grass-fed butter, if it's well-sourced meats and coconut oil, etc., the research still clearly shows that we want to keep saturated fats still in moderation, for similar reasons to the trans fats, however in a lot less gravity. So what do I mean by that? Saturated fats do at first still increase LDL, so bad cholesterol. However, in contrast to the trans fatty acids, many of those good, well-sourced saturated fats also do a lot of good afterwards, for example, MCT oil, etc., by later on also raising up HDL cholesterol. So kind of doing both in a different kind of way. So longer story short, keep saturated fats in moderation. Most importantly, though, make sure that the foods that contain a lot of saturated fats are high quality, because the quality of the saturated fat will determine to which extent it raises the HDL cholesterol or the LDL cholesterol. So that is probably the most important part. Use grass-fed butter, use coconut oil, and so on, but still keep it to the general recommendation is about 5 to 6% of your total calorie intake. So if you're on about 2,000 calories, that would be 120 calories purely from saturated fat. So that doesn't mean just a tablespoon of butter, because even butter is a mixture of saturated fats and some of the other fats. So I should have probably said that at the beginning. And hardly any food is like purely or only one type of fat. It's usually a bit of a blend of the various saturated fats, but certain foods such as butter are known for being very high in one type of particular fat. So butter, in the case of butter, is saturated fat. Now let's move on to some of the more fun and even healthier fat categories or fatty acids, the monounsaturated fats. This would be your omega-7s, your omega-9s. So when it comes to the mono and polyunsaturated fats, or the unsaturated fats in general, they are called that once again because of their chemical structure and because they either have one mono or two double bonds in their chemical structure, and depending on where the double bond is, or how many they have, this is why they are called omega-7. So for example, omega-7 would have a double bond at the 7th basically structure, and 9 on that location. So that is where the name originates from. Omega-7 and omega-9 are actually non-essential, meaning your body can produce those on its own. However, that doesn't mean there is no benefit to them. On the very contrary, some of the most popular diets and diets that have shown to be some of the healthiest, such as the Mediterranean diet, are incredibly high in omega-9 fatty acids in particular, or generally in monounsaturated fats. For example, olive oil, avocado, nuts, and seeds, all of these are mostly classified monounsaturated fats. So there is a lot of evidence showing that monounsaturated fats are anti-inflammatory, meaning they fight inflammation, obviously, but they fight any kind of damaged structure in the body. So if you're training really hard, if you have the risk of cancer popping up, if your brain cells are slowly dying, etc., all of this is being fought by monounsaturated fats. However, there are also omega-9s and omega-7s or other monounsaturated fats present in small quantities in hydrogenated processed versions like peanut oil, sesame oil, soybean oil, canola oil. So in those things, because they have been processed so much in order to become an oil version, the damage that has occurred through the process basically created negative impacts of that product, which now outweigh the positives of the omega-9s and omega-7s. So it's a little bit hard to understand why one type of oil or plant, such as olive oil, should be more or healthier or less damaging than peanut oil, canola oil, and so on. But it just really has to do with the chemical structure. So again, kind of understanding that no oil or type of fat is purely one type of fatty acid. B, that the process in which we consume the product, or the basically how we consume that product. So peanuts, sesames, soybeans, and so on, they are healthy in their purest version, but because of all that highly hydrogenating process, so basically a heating process, and where chemicals are changed around in order to make that last longer, because of that, they no longer have these anti-inflammatory processes. So I hope that this is kind of that makes a little bit of sense. Now, finishing off with the last and most awesome category are polyunsaturated fats. We have the two most well-known polyunsaturated fats, which are omega-6 and omega-3s. So I've just added some names here also on the previous slide for what these omegas are also called. Omega-6s are also called linoleic acid. This is also a little bit of a dangerous statement, I guess, that I made here. Pro-inflammatory. Once again, like those are the same, some of the same oils that I have just mentioned on the previous slide, for the reason that they are not purely poly or mono. But basically, same thing. The omega-6s in those oils have been altered to that extent that they are no longer anti-inflammatory. Technically speaking, omega-6s are essential in our body and are helpful. However, and here's the most important part, I guess, in our modern diet, our omega-6s far outweigh our omega-3s. And ideally, omega-3s and omega-6s should always be in somewhat of a balance. So the average ratio amongst our Western population is somewhere between 16:1 to 20:1, roughly speaking. 4:1 would already be awesome. 1:1 is like a dream and next to impossible. I think they have found that in the past in some like Alaskan whatever culture. So very difficult to achieve. And why are we wanting to strive for this kind of ratio? Because omega-3s are the most anti-inflammatory fatty acids, particularly. So we have three kinds. We have EPAs, we have DHAs, and we have ALA. So particularly EPA is the most protective when it comes to our brain health. It's the most anti-inflammatory when it comes to any kind of inflammation, whether that is from training or whatever. DHA also does a lot of good, but EPA is literally the most important. And there is, when it comes to omega-3, there is really no overdosing on that. You know, with almost all other supplements, there is an upper tolerable limit proven, which we should really usually stay underneath. But when it comes to omega-3, there is not too much of a good thing. When it comes to ALA, so ALA is the type of omega-3 or fatty acid which is usually present in plants, specifically walnuts, chia, and flax seeds, and so on. And especially a few years ago, amongst the vegan community, it was very popular to use ALA to supplement for your omega-3s. However, research now clearly shows that ALA has to be transcribed into EPA and DHA in the body in order for it to have these anti-inflammatory benefits. And the body's transcription process is very, very ineffective. In a good case scenario, about 20% of your ALA fatty acids actually turn into EPAs, into anti-inflammatory functions. In a bad case scenario, so if your body's not very efficient at it, it's as little as 5% or less. So, think about that when you are consuming your supplement and your, 100 calories or so from ALAs, thinking I'm going to get huge benefits from that. You're actually only getting a super, super tiny percentage of a benefit out of using ALAs. So if you are vegan, though, there is one type of algae oil which actually does contain EPA. So just really making sure when you're looking out for your product that you're looking at the nutrition panel, you're not just paying attention to total omega-3s, but most specifically to EPA and DHA as well. Generally speaking, you can tell a good supplement by the fact that at least 70% of the omega-3 content is EPA and DHA combined. So what do I mean by that? If an omega-3 supplement says on the back contains 1,000 milligrams of omega-3, we want underneath of that to say that at least 700 milligrams of that are EPA and DHA combined. So most of the time it'll be something like 500 milligrams of EPA, 780 milligrams of DHA. That would be a pretty decent supplement. Generally speaking, if you're aiming for about for at least 2 grams of EPA and DHA combined per day, that's a really good way of increasing your ratio to a more anti-inflammatory state in your body. So if you're taking anything away from this whole slide here or this whole presentation, limit trans fats, keep saturated fats in moderation, eat more monounsaturated fats, limit hydrogenated vegetable oils, and eat more omega-3, particularly DHA and EPA, or EPA in particular. Most people will, however, struggle very, very much reaching their optimal EPA levels without supplementation. So let's say 99.8% of the population is most likely going to benefit from supplementing with EPA and DHA. And overall, just to kind of like tie that back to the beginning, we want to, as fats are an essential macronutrient and so helpful and involved in many physical processes, particularly hormone production, but also like neurotransmitter production, which is linked to hormones, so mental health and so on. So because of this reason, we do not want to let your fats drop lower than about 25% of total calories on average. And so, if you're in a dieting phase and you are at about 1,600 calories or so, then see that at least 400 of your calories are coming from fats. Or if you are at 130 pounds, or let's make it easier for sake of calculation, 120 pounds, and about a third of your body weight should still be fats or more. So 40 grams of fat. That's what that would be. It should be your lower limit, essentially. So when it comes to setting your fat targets, I just wanted to mention that you should take personal preference into account. Again, just taking that minimal level into account too. But if you're like, okay, I'd actually like super high fats and low carbs, or I'm really just gonna stick with that minimal level, that's up to you. Also depends on your activity level. Limiting fats around your workouts simply helps with energy release, helps with energy absorption afterwards. So that's usually a good idea. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if we want to avoid energy crashes and so on, make sure that you're including more fats into those meals. And lastly, as I said, we don't want to demonize fats. Overall, fats are very, very good for us, but particularly we want to pay attention to getting more HDL and getting less LDL. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you have any questions about this or personal experiences limiting fat for too long, or just in general on fats, please let me know. I'm always happy to hear some questions, some comments and feedback, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.